Well, thanks everybody. Welcome to our council meeting for our last council meeting for the year on the 14th of December 2021. It's great to have the gallery back in. What we're going to do, well, because we've got a gallery, we're just going to go quickly around the room and introduce all councillors and their portfolios, and also our corporate management team. So obviously, I'm Dean Rees, I'm the Mayor of the Rural City, and planning is my portfolio, and I'll transfer to my deputy. Thanks, Councillor Bussell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Harry Bussell, Councillor for the South Ward, and tourism is my portfolio. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ashley Fitzpatrick for the City Ward, and my portfolio is youth, family, community wellbeing, and all abilities.
Irene Grant, I'm the councillor for Warby Ward, and economic development is my portfolio.
Sarah.
Sarah Brindley, Director of Corporate Services and the Wenger Sports and Aquatic Centre.
I'm Stephen Swart, I'm the Director of Development Services.
Mark Schooner, Director of Infrastructure.
Councillor Harvey Benton from the North Ward, with our agriculture, emergency and sport and recreation portfolio.
Councillor Dave Fuller, City Ward, Arts, Culture and Heritage and Events, and then also Environment and Community Engagement.
And Brendan McGrath, Chief Executive Officer, and appearing remotely.
Councillor Jack Herry, one of the City Ward councillors. Portfolios are community engagement and sustainability, environment and resource recovery.
Thanks, Brendan. I'd already forgotten, Jack. I'd just like to, before I go on, Clause 24 of the Governance Rules provides the following: that this public meeting is being recorded to improve access to the meeting for our community. The recording will be published and will be retained by Council in accordance with Council's legal obligations. So as a visitor in this public gallery, your presence may be recorded. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you. If I could ask everyone to stand. I acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting from the lands of the Bangarang people. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work and meet today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait people that may be participating in this meeting. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Wangaratta and Victoria.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Grant.
While we remain standing. Almighty God, we humbly ask you to bless and guide this council in its deliberations so that we may truly preserve the welfare of the people whom we serve. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few housekeeping issues. I'd like to point out that Councillor Herry is in Japan and joining us via live stream. Under Victorian Government regulations, he is allowed to be involved in this meeting remotely. He is allowed to vote and comment as if he was here. So we look forward to his active conversation throughout the evening and look forward to hearing his votes on which way he would vote. So thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll just skip down to item number 6, the citizenship ceremony. We do not have one. Item number 7 is confirmation of the minutes from our previous meeting. Councillor Benton, thoughts?
Move that true and correct.
So Councillor Benton's moved that they're true and correct, and Councillor Dave Fuller will second that. All those in favour? And that recommendation is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, item number 8 is a conflict of interest disclosure. And if any councillor has a conflict, they will need to step out of the room, state their conflict, and step out of the room during of which an item is discussed. And there isn't an item that I will need to step out of the room at 15.2, which is a planning permit application for 85 Old School Road, Waldara, which is a residential subdivision and removal of an easement. I have a general conflict of interest as I have a family member who was one of the objectors to this subdivision. So thank you. We have no reception of petitions, hearing of deputations. We'll move straight into presentation of reports, and we'll go to office reports at number 12. 12.1 is the 2022 council meeting dates and venues. Executive services.
Thanks, Mayor. This is looking for endorsement of the proposed meeting dates and locations for the 2022 council meetings. We've had a long-standing practice of holding 4 meetings a year in rural locations. That's been somewhat stymied over the last couple of years by COVID, where we've either been in lockdown or numbers for gatherings have been restricted such that there wasn't much point in going to a rural area and not being able to have anyone come to the gallery. So next year's proposed dates are essentially looking to do the rural meetings that we were going to do last year, which is Carbour in March, Warrowley in April, Greta in September and Springhurst in October, with the balance of the meetings being held here in Wenger.
Thank you, Brendan. It's actually Greta. But thank you for that. Thank you for that. Are there any questions from the gallery in relation to this item on the agenda? Can I have somebody move this item? Councillor Grant and Councillor Bussell. 2 seconds. Councillor Grant, would you want to talk on the recommendation as the mover?
Well, yes, Mr Mayor, only to say that I'm glad to see that we're going back out to the rural areas again. Pleased to see that Greta, which is in my ward, will be a meeting location. It's a great opportunity. We always have quite a lot of people come along to the meetings. It's a good opportunity to, meet face to face and have conversation and discuss matters that, otherwise, people don't necessarily want to come into Wenger. So it's a good way of going out to meet our municipalities. So I'm glad to see that it's back on the agenda, and I'll move that recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Bussell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. As the second, I think it's just exciting. I support everything Councillor Grant said, because we get so many more people in the rural areas turn up because they engage, and particularly the South Ward, they come in droves to the council meetings. So I look forward to that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
I'm sorry, you can ask these questions now at the end, at public question time. I did ask if there were questions from the gallery at the start of this item. Now missed that, and it's already been moved and seconded. It's been voted on. It will be voted on. Councillor Fuller, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just acknowledging the middle part of the year in May and August, where it's 3 p.m. instead of 6 p.m, enabling some different audience to participate possibly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grant, did you need to finish off with anything? Happy to. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, Jack. Recommendation is carried. Thank you, Brendan. Can we move on to 12.2, which is the appointment of directors to the Wenger Livestock Exchange?
We can, having established a separate independent business at the sale yards some time ago, we now have one of those appointed directors' terms expiring, and this report is seeking authorisation to reappoint one of the independent directors to that board.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery in relation to this matter? Thank you. Can I have a mover? Councillor Fitzpatrick and Councillor Benson as a seconder. Any councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor.
I'd like to acknowledge the directors that are on the board, and the way the sale yards has changed operations slightly and moved their same dates. That the positivity on the balance sheet is starting to show through, and specifically in these very difficult times over the last 2 years. So it's been a bit of a win-win. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benson. Any other councillor like to talk? No, I'd like to also point out the great members on the board, led by John Maraca over that time. Has certainly been a vast improvement, and very well attended meetings, and getting better and better. So thank you too. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Brendan. That's the end of your role as Executive Services. I'll now hand over to Director Brindley, Corporate Services, and we're going to go 13.1, which is our procurement policy. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So the draft procurement policy was endorsed by Council at the September Council meeting to go on public exhibition for 28 days, which has been completed. No public submissions were received. We did receive a bit of internal feedback, so there have been a couple of small changes made to the policy to reflect that internal feedback. So as per the recommendation for the September Council meeting, we are now returning to request that Council adopts the procurement policy in accordance with the Local Government Act 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions from the gallery? No, thank you. Can I have a mover, please, for that? Councillor Fuller and Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Fuller, did you need to talk on the recommendation? No. Councillor Fitzpatrick, any other councillor like to talk on it? No, that's easy. We'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Brindley, 13.2, which is our advisory committee review.
Thank you. So Council has a number of advisory committees that provide subject matter expertise and advice to Council on a range of topics, and the committees themselves are listed in the report. Council has recently requested a review of the advisory committees to determine, do they still meet their stated objective? Is that objective still relevant? And is there any better way to consult with the community and the committees in these areas? There has been consultation with those committee members and with councillors, and the report and findings and recommendations are presented to Council for your consideration this evening. So the recommendation is firstly that Council endorses in principle the advisory committee review report, and secondly that Council continues to engage in the design of suitable terms of reference and implementation of the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any questions from the gallery on this item? No. I'll look for someone to move the recommendation. Councillor Benton and Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton, did you need to talk?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I suppose I've been one of the councillors of the city that sat on advisory committees for many, many years, and there has been a struggle to understand the communication and functionality between this room and the advisory committee. I think this has been well overdue, but the devil will be in the detail, and then moving forward we have the option to make sure the terms of reference to these committees are going to improve the functionality of the committees to be advisors to the council going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Benton. Councillor Herry, please.
Thank you, Mayor Reeves. Yeah, I just want to highlight the point that it's definitely not an indictment upon the existing committees or any members. Historically, it's just been a really good opportunity to review how they work and improve look at improving some processes. As Councillor Benson indicated, the terms of reference will be a pretty pivotal and important document in this process. And we'll see that as it comes to fruition. Lastly, I'd just like to thank the advisory committees and the members for working with us through this process, and it's definitely been at front and centre of everyone's mind to ensure that they are involved and engaged in the review process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Good comments. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I also wanted to reiterate what Councillor Herry said, but also thank Andrew Lovett at Council for consulting with us councillors and the advisory committees. He's been thorough, he's been fantastic, so I just want to also make mention to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Grant.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to obviously reiterate the comments that have already been made, but to also emphasise the importance of advisory committees to Council. They are our eyes and ears into the community, and they've provided great advice over the years, and I'd like to thank them for the work that they've done. This review was timely, and I think we're going to get a more productive and better outcome in terms of decision making as we move forward through this process. So, and also acknowledge the great work of Andrew Lovett in all of this. It's been quite an exhaustive process, so it's been well done. So I'd like to support Councillor Benton's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton, did you need anything to end off as the mover? No. So thank you. We'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of accepting? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. We'll move to Officer Report number 14. It's Infrastructure Services. We'll introduce Director Goonan for this one. 14.1 is the Community Asset Committee's annual report. Thank you, Director Goonan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is presented to Council on the activities of the 14 Community Asset Committees during the 2021 period, including on their expenditure on maintenance and improvements with the changes to the Local Government Act 2020. The instrument of sub-delegation, it is now a requirement of council officers to report to council annually on the activities of all community asset committees. The recommendation is that council accepts the report on the activities of the community asset committees in accordance with section 47 of the Local Government Act.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery on this matter? No, thank you. Can I have someone to move the recommendation? Councillor, I was looking for you, Councillor Herry. Councillor Herry to move it. Councillor Bustle, I saw your hand go up as a seconder. Councillor Herry, did you want to talk on the recommendation? No, you're okay. Councillor Bustle.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank all the tireless work that's done by volunteers who treasure these assets owned by council, look after them as if these halls and places their own. The work doesn't go unnoticed, so I thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? No, we'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Goonan, 14.2 is C32977 Glenroyal Cultural Interpretive Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is presented to council to recommend the awarding of contract for the Glenroyal Cultural Interpretive Centre construction. The Glenroyal project aims to develop a unique and contemporary tourism interpretive experience through the development of self-guided centre, utilising modern technology to bring to life the Glenroyal history, telling the story of not only the Ned Kelly gang but also hostages, the police and Indigenous trackers who were involved in the siege of Glenroyal. Council received $3.5 million from the Infrastructure Stimulus Fund for the project, and council has contributed a cash contribution of $500,000, adopting in the 2021 budget a total budget of $4 million. Due to significant cost escalations for construction materials and labour brought on by COVID-19, there is a $1,843,000 shortfall in the budget. This shortfall is proposed to be allocated to the project from adjustments in council's long-term financial plan. The recommendation is to award the contract for the Glenroyal Cultural Interpretive Centre, allocate the additional $1.8+ million to the project, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal the documents when available, and disclose the contract amount.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Are there any questions on this recommendation? No, thank you. Can I have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Grant, thank you for moving. And a seconder? Councillor Benton. Councillor Grant, did you want to talk on the recommendation as the Ward Councillor for Glenroyal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, yes, this is a difficult decision for council to make because I think we are in a position that should we say no to the development, we are then obliged to return the stimulus money, which I think would, I think not be a good look for council to do that. And in terms of Glenroyal has been waiting a very long time for some significant investment. There has been some investment over a period of time, but this is a major push towards tourism in the township. And I think to say no at this particular point, I think would mean that at some point in the future we would regret that decision. I understand that we're going to now have to look at our long-term financial plan to find those dollars, but it's also we're going into an election year next year, so there are opportunities that we might be able to source additional funding get this project over the line. But I would hate not, to see it come to fruition. So I'm very much in support of it. I visited Glenroyal and saw a number of businesses last week, and people are there looking forward to seeing something happen in their backyard. And even though it's part of the Kelly story, Glenroyal is much more than that. And I think this will be a significant asset. It won't be just a building. It will be an asset that will draw people and sort of round out the tourism offer that Glenroyal has. So I move the recommendation and support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Herry?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. It certainly, most definitely is a challenging decision. I definitely have some reservations around this one. I appreciate that it's cost escalation that's out of our control, and I do acknowledge the economic development and the increase in tourism that this building could potentially have on the township of Glenroyal. It's just a very tight budget that we're running. There's not a great deal of headroom over the next 5 years in the long-term financial plan, and we're whittling away our headroom in the subsequent 5 years, the second half of the decade. So it's a significant increase in our contribution from 500,000 to 1.8 million. So I'm definitely struggling with this decision. But having said all that, I do appreciate the significant amount of community engagement and work that has been done so far to get the project to the point where it's at. So it's very much a matter of balancing up those things. And I acknowledge all of Councillor Grant's comments, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Other councillors to talk? Councillor Busman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This also can double as a visitors information centre, and I think that'll be important for the traffic coming from the south, and that gives the council a lot of opportunities to promote our offering in the tourist space into the future. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Benton.
I'd just like to endorse the words that have been said previously in relationship to the increase in the budget. Yes, it's been a difficult process, but handing back the money would also be a very difficult process going forward, because we might need another lick of the ice cream or some other time, knowing government how they work. And I know the Mayor and the CEO have spent time in Melbourne talking to relevant officers, seeing whether we can actually alleviate with the spiralling costs that have just ran away since March. And we hope to it's a bushfire, quite frankly, in the way that the prices have gone, and we hope that they're contained. But in saying that, this is something that I think has been waited for a long time. I've heard a lot of people say we don't do enough in this country in relationship to their heritage in relation to this matters. So that's one of the reasons why I've supported it, to bring people into the area going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Grant, to end off, you okay?
Well, just to say to Councillor Benton, as long as it's not a self-licking ice cream.
You know what that means.
But look, I think, there's been a huge amount of work done in Glenroyal, and they've been waiting for a very long time. And I think now is the time to deliver this interpretive centre. Look, it's not going to get cheaper into the future, and we've got to capitalise on the opportunity now, and recognise, and Councillor Herry did say it is has some reservations. It's a cost escalation. We've got a tight budget, but should we not do it, I think we would very much rue the day in the future. So that's my final comments.
Thanks, Councillor Grant. So I'll put the recommendation now to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you, Director Goonan. Would you like to announce the price?
Yes, the price is $4,774,350, GST exclusive.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to item 15, which is Development Services through Director Swart. Thank you, Director Swart. Before you go, there'll be a number of public questions on this that I will read out, even though some of our people who have submitted the questions may be here. I will read them out if you're still comfortable with that. And then any other public questions, please come forward. So I'll read my questions first and then go from there. Thank you, Director.
Thank you. This item is presented to Council to consider the adoption of the low density and rural residential strategy. The purpose of the strategy is to identify the future need for low density and rural living zoned land in the rural city of Wenger and to ensure that this need can be met to provide current and future residents with a diverse range of housing options. The draft strategy has been developed over a period of 2 years, and the process to prepare that draft strategy included extensive community consultation. The final draft strategy is ready for formal adoption by Council. Should Council decide to adopt this strategy, some changes would be needed to the Wenger planning scheme to implement the strategy, and the officer's recommendation enables this work to take place.
Thank you, Director. I'll now go to public questions in relation to this issue. So the first question I will bring up is from a submitter by the name of Vicky Lorraine Beaches, and her questions are: in reference to the conversation with Councillor Grant regarding the low density residential strategic plan for Tone Road and Jordan's Lane, have the property developers been informed of the potential flooding in this area which will cause future homeowners a lot of grief? Director Swart.
Thank you for that question. The first point I'll make is that the latest flood status study for Wenger was considered as part of the development of the low density and rural residential strategy. That flood study was completed in 2017. The flood overlay mapping for Wenger has recently been updated by Planning Scheme Amendment C81, and all affected landowners of that Planning Scheme Amendment were directly notified of that amendment during the exhibition process. That mapping was based on the flood study completed in 2017. Council has also committed to undertake further work with the Catchment Management Authority on some climate change modelling, and that work can be considered at the next stage of strategy or implementation of the strategy. The work has not been completed to date, and further comments about that work will be provided later on.
Thank you, Director. A couple of questions from a submitter by the name of Peter Forsyth. The first question is re-secondary growth areas. Given the original LDRZ and RRZ investigation and resultant findings / data pertain to land not including farm zone, land south of Clark's Lane, that was excluded from the investigation, where is the specific data not bundled in the W1C north of Clark's Lane? What specific data regarding proven demand for LDRZ and RRZ housing was used to inform the inclusion of a highly productive generational farm zone land south of Clark's Lane? Was there a follow-up investigation undertaken to include south of Clark's Lane, and if so, were the specific findings and the data sets that informed our decision making?
Thank you for the question again. I might start with the first part of that question. The low density and rural residential strategy did investigate land south of Clark's Lane and north of Jordan's Lane. This area, and that was done from the outset, so during the first part of the process. This area is currently designated as future investigation area within the Wenger planning scheme under clause 2102. These areas, along with other investigation areas nominated within the planning scheme around townships, were the starting point of investigation for the strategy. In terms of the second part of that question, a range of assessments and analysis were undertaken as part of developing the draft strategy. That includes a fairly detailed demand and supply assessment when it comes to land supply and demand. That information is contained not just only in the strategy, but also in the attachments to the strategy. The strategy also considered a range of other matters to get to its conclusions. And that included the agricultural value of land, related to the state planning policy framework and our local planning policy framework on that matter. We'd also considered bushfire risk, constraints such as flooding potential, infrastructure, surrounding land uses, and this analysis is contained within the strategy document and also the attachments to the strategy document.
Thank you, Director. Question number 2, re primary growth areas. How is it possible that despite a proven obvious demand for LDRZ and rural living land, RRZ, in Wangaratta Premium Northwest Growth Corridor, that there be no new proposed rezoned areas to increase supply? Is this an acceptable outcome of an investigation/strategy to create 450 to 900 LDRZ and RRZ lots in the city of Wangaratta for the next 15 to 30 years?
Thank you again for that question. As mentioned in the draft strategy that's attached to tonight's agenda, growth for Wangaratta when it comes to low density and rural residential land is not being directed to the north of Wangaratta due to its inability to meet state planning policy around bushfire settlement planning. The strategy directs growth to the south of Wangaratta where there's stronger policy support for low density residential zone and rural living zone. I should also point out that clause 2102 of the Wangaratta planning scheme identifies 2 major growth areas, residential growth areas, the northwest growth area and also the south Wangaratta growth area. The location of the growth area is shown on settlement maps in figure 12 within the planning scheme. These areas are not suitable for investigation for rezoning to the low density residential zone and the rural living zone due to their designation for other purposes. So that land was identified for future long-term residential development within the planning scheme and therefore was not considered as part of this strategy.
Thank you, Director. A couple of other questions I'll just fire away, and these are from submitters Alan and Deborah Conroy. And the questions are as follows. We refer to our submission dated on the 20th of October 2021, where we were asked the following questions about the northeast water sewerage system. Did we want to read this as part of this submission? I can't remember it. What is the capacity of the Oxley Miller sewage system? That is the maximum number of households it can service. What is the size/diameter of the main sewerage pipeline? How many houses in Oxley Miller are currently being serviced? And 4, how many more houses could potentially be built on vacant lots in existing Oxley and Millerwood townships of LDRZ zones?
Thank you for those questions. Many of those questions are, of a detailed technical nature about the sewage system and, the size of pipes and so on. Council has limited information on the technical nature of those systems, including the number of dwelling connections and pipe dimensions. That level of detail is not required for this type of strategic planning exercise. The information received from North East Water, who's the authority for those services, as part of the strategy indicates that small town sewage systems in Oxley and other towns were designed to accommodate the current zoned land, including infill subdivision and development, or a little bit of development. That in itself does not rule out future further development. Council will continue to work with North East Water to ensure long-term capacity is planned within the network.
Thank you, Stephen. Further questions is 5, 6 and 7 and regarding this. Why many developments in Wangaratta are on hold due to sewage capacity already being full? Who is accountable for this lack of foresight with planning, and what money needs to be spent to increase capacity on sewage systems, and how long will this take? In relation to that, did you want to answer that or not? Yes, you can.
Thank you again for those questions. North East Water is the responsible authority for the provision of sewage infrastructure in Wangaratta. North East Water has informed Council that there is very limited capacity to accommodate new residential development in Wangaratta and elsewhere in the short term. Council continues to work with North East Water to address this situation. Works are planned to be undertaken soon to secure some capacity in parts of Wangaratta, and options for medium to long-term solutions are being finalised. The exact cost and timing of the required works is unknown at this point.
I'd just like to add to that, after meeting on numerous occasions during our growth strategies for our residential areas over the last 5 years, and especially 4 years as the Mayor and even previous, we were informing North East Water all the way along 5 years ago of our potential growth and that we were going to expand. Councillor Bustle and myself always said we were going to increase Wangaratta by 10,000 people within a period of 5 years, and it's working. And North East Water haven't kept up to date with the demands and the shortcomings of supply. This is now a council problem as well, because this slows up our development and the progress of our great city. And to put it bluntly, I feel we've been let down a little bit by North East Water. However, North East Water are working hard to overcome these problems now, and hopefully should have some good positive outcomes within the next 12 months, and growth can continue. Further questions regarding our farm property. Stephen, at 39 Oxley Meadow Creek Road, Oxley, if the proposed LDR zoning is approved by council, what is the process time frame for this implementation? What effect will that have on rates for this property? And how would the rezoning affect farming on this property?
Thank you again. So attachment 1 to the council report contains a flow chart with some estimated timeframes, and that also links into information concerning sewage. For land at Oxley, it's proposed that the next step would be step 2B in accordance with that flow chart, where we would undertake an active structure planning exercise, and this will probably occur over the next year to 3 years. And then any rezoning of land would then be beyond that time frame. So the structure planning exercise will provide us with a bit more detail as to how to move ahead with the rezoning of land, and then we'd be ready to go through a rezoning process. So beyond that 3 to 4 year process. In terms of the question about rates, rates are determined by the value of the property, and the impact of any rezoning of land on land value at this point would be unknown. Generally speaking, when it comes to pure land use planning exercises, especially strategic land use planning exercises, the value of land is not a consideration that is taken into consideration purely from a planning point of view. We would take into consideration technical aspects.
Thank you, Director. Thank you. Are there any other questions in relation to LDRZ from the gallery? No, thank you. Sorry.
Yes, please, just...
Deborah? Did you just want to come forward to the microphone? Thank you. And just state your name for the record, please.
Deborah Conroy. So, yeah, that was very general. We're probably looking for a little bit more detail. So it's looking as though probably perhaps beyond 3 years before you're looking to actually rezone. Generally speaking, when farm property changes to low density rural, is there a rough figure of how much the rates are likely to increase, or?
So, sorry, Brendan, could you?
Yeah, happy to answer that. It's very difficult to be specific. We have external valuers who value all our properties. They then provide us those values to apply to the rates. When properties do change in zone, in the longer term, it is likely to have an impact on their value, but generally not until it's developable. So If we look at our northwest growth areas and south growth areas, which we rezoned to residential over a number of years, a number of properties went from farm zone to residential zones. Their property values were not impacted until they were actually developable, and so until they could start to lodge planning permit applications and so forth, because the value doesn't really change until you can have the benefit of that new underlying use. There were a couple of examples where those properties couldn't be developed for immediate reasons, and they were able to go back to the valuer and request a revaluation, and that was all worked through with them. So you would not likely see the impact of that until a few years' time, when it was actually rezoned and when someone would be able to start to lodge an application to develop a site, if that's what somebody wanted to do.
Right, so we're not likely to get hit with a big increase when it first changed the zone until it got to a point where you...
Yeah, that's generally correct.
Yep.
And Deborah, we're happy to work with you privately on this too, through Stephen's department, to give you a bit more information and see some comparable things that have happened in the past.
Yep, that's good. And if it gets rezoned, it can still operate farming wise until...
Forever.
Forever, right.
Yeah, that's right. You know, the fact that something is rezoned doesn't preclude you from continuing with the way you are using it right now.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Simon. If there's no further questions from the gallery, I'd like to move an alternate recommendation in relation to this matter. And I'll just read the full recommendation. It's very similar to the previous recommendation, but the recommendation is as follows. It notes all submissions to the draft low density and rural residential strategy, LDRR, makes changes to the draft LDRR in response to submissions where applicable, as outlined in the attachment 1, and formally adopts the revised low density RR attachment 2, with the exception of those parts of the strategy that applies to Wangaratta, and it requests council officers to undertake a further investigation into the potential rezoning of land in Wangaratta. We also, number 4 now, it advises all submitters of council's decision to adopt part of the LDRR, prepares documentation and seeks authorisation to exhibit a planning scheme amendment to the Wangaratta planning scheme to implement the relevant recommendations of the LDRR, delegates to the directors of the Development Services responsibility to make any changes to the adopted documents and planning scheme amendments as required by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, or identified by council officers in the preparation of the planning scheme amendment material. Number 7, it continues to engage with North East Water to ensure that integrated water management can be planned for the proposed growth under the LDRR in a timely and coordinated manner. And number 8, resolves to progress stage 2 of the strategy, including undertaking further strategic planning work to enable the research and development of structure plans and appropriate planning tools to guide the future development and rezoning of areas Oxley and Millawa in line with the recommendation of the LDRR. I've taken out South Wangaratta out of that recommendation in clause number 8, which would have been clause 7 in the documents forward.
Mr. I have a question.
Please.
Just to be clear, so Millawa, Oxley and Moorview are still going ahead to be investigated?
Is still continuing further with the recommendation. We're just pulling everything out and about around Wangaratta for further investigation by council and by council officers to come back to council laws. Can I have someone second that recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Bussell to second it. Would any councillors like to talk on it? As the mover, I think I should probably talk first on it. I'm not completely happy with areas of Wangaratta not included in future zoning of low density residential land. We have a huge supply, and we know where people want to be, which is out in the west corridor or the northwest corridor. I listened to the talk at council officer level about that that this land is earmarked for future subdivision over the next 30, 40 plus years into low density or high density residential for the further of our growth areas beyond where they are. We've got a lot of growth areas to fill up before then. So our council officers are feeling that that land is earmarked for that smaller subdivisional land over the next 40 to 50 years. Well, that land was zoned farming and was always meant to be farming, so we're changing that. They're concerned by making smaller lots, it's going to make it harder to subdivide into, or to rezone that again for the future into smaller lots. So I can't see why that land pushing out from Shanley Street all the way through to Warby Range Road and then across towards Lindner Road and further is where people want to be, on low density residential lots. And if the future arises that in 40 years time we need more residential lots, general residential, well, those people have a windfall that maybe their 10-acre lot is worth more money and can be subdivided up into 40 new allotments. There's now a new windfall tax, so that mightn't apply to people for that. But people want to be close to town, have larger allotments, and they want to be in the West End corridor, and we're completely erasing it because of certain reasons, example fire, and that can be mitigated. It doesn't fit in with the exact scheme, but we can design subdivisions for that way to mitigate those results. So I feel a lot more work needs to be done in those areas and not just push it out the Yarrawonga Road. So that is my reason for making this alternate recommendation for more study, more to come back to us as councillors and to be explained. Thank you. Councillor Bustle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to talk about the motion. I'm really excited that Millwall, Oxley and More You have the opportunity to develop, and there's a great amount of opportunities in the King Valley, and this can't happen soon enough from my point of view. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bustle. Any other councillors like to talk? Councillor Grant, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm pleased to be able to...
Just one sec. Thanks, Jack. I'll come to you shortly.
I'm pleased to see that we've got a further opportunity to look at the plan, to look at, I've got concerns about the impacts of the bushfire zone on our growth areas, and the opportunity for council to have a further discussion around how we move forward. I think it's worth doing, and it's important to how Wenger develops. So to delay it for another month or so, I think is something really important.
Councillor Harry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I have concerns to a degree somewhat about this document, the strategy. They're slightly from a different tangent perhaps. Just on the conversation regarding a shift of low density residential to a general residential sort of conversion, I'm under the impression that's a very difficult shift to have done in an orderly fashion. Perhaps for me that is one aspect of this strategy which I have some reservations about, because ultimately at the end of the day, low density residential zone and rural residential zone are really generally inefficient and less desirable forms of land use and development, particularly when you have really constrained amounts of land to develop. And if there's one thing that can be said about Wangaratta, particularly the urban area in the city of Wangaratta, it's that we definitely have a lot of constraints on land and not much land to work with. So I think we need to be extremely mindful of that and extremely careful to ensure we extract, put it to the best use, I guess, and put it to the most efficient use, and don't assign land to a certain use and think that it can then easily be switched over to another use. Basically not put it to a low density form and then expect it to become easily changed to a higher density form. So they're just my concerns around that whole density conversation. A few other things I know about the strategy is that it talks a lot around drivers for this push, and a lot of those market demand, and I don't discount the fact that people do want to live in these sorts of properties, and there is a demand for it, and there is a limited supply for it. But I am hesitant to allow market influences or market demand or trends in the sorts of housing people do want to opt for to influence too greatly. It's definitely something to be considered, but to influence too greatly.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, we're not actually discussing.
Councillor Airy, point of order, the point of order that you're discussing, are you saying we're off topic, Councillor Benton? Councillor Airy, we're not talking about the types of houses designed, we're talking about subdivision requirements.
Yes, appreciated, but I guess the forms of living on a large block versus small block, high density versus low density, I guess that's the strategic planning discussion we're having. Anyhow, I just want to finish up, I'll wrap up and say that I think in some respects in that discussion, the Oxley and Miller were kind of horses bolted, but there's still Mordew, which has a town plan yet to be developed, and I would like to see those rural areas enabled to continue into the second stages of this work, which will involve a lot more detailed work.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. Councillor Benton?
I just want to not take up too much time, Mr. Mayor, in relationship to this. I think it's a good idea that we've had put on the hold the Wenger areas to get some more explain and narrative around, particularly the owners, of what is actually intended and the steps going forward. I don't think it will be a greater length of time. We can investigate some of the other areas that you mentioned going forward. But at the end of the day, we might have our hands tied there going forward with the bushfire activity. And it's becoming more and more draconian, some of those from the state government. Whether we like it or not, we're going to have to accept that. But I'd like to see that explored and going forward understood whether we can accommodate some of this out in, particularly in the northwest area of Wenger. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. So I'm finishing off. I'd like to reiterate that in our current growth areas, we have 5 acre lots, 10 acre lots, 20 acre lots, 40 acre lots that have already been rezoned into general residential now. So spreading out to that area towards Warby Range Road and doing that now is no different to what we already have done. So changing those areas to where people want to be. Also the fixing up of anomalies at Oxley, which is included in this recommendation, in Miller, and a little triangle in Miller that should have been done 5 years ago under our former director that was missed out. It's taken so much time, and I feel for the people in those areas. So I support all my councillors to move ahead with this recommendation and more investigation into the Wangaratta area. Thank you. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Sorry, Jack, are you in favour? Yes.
Yes, there is.
The recommendation is carried. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, 15.2 is a planning application of which I will have to step out of the room for. Again, I'll note my conflict of interest, which is a general conflict of interest, as I have a family member who is one of the objectors that I need to excuse myself. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stephen Swat.
Thank you. This report is presented to Council to determine a planning permit application for a residential subdivision. The application proposes to subdivide land at number 85 Old School Road into 13 residential lots and to remove an easement. The application was referred to relevant authorities and public notice was given. 6 objections were received in response to the application, and the subdivision application was amended in an attempt to address some of the issues raised within those submissions. One of the objections has subsequently been withdrawn, so there's 5 unresolved submissions remaining. The application has been assessed against the relevant parts of the Wangaratta Planning Scheme and the Planning and Environment Act, and officers recommend that Council issue a notice of decision to grant the permit subject to permit conditions, and those are contained within attachment 2 in the agenda.
Thank you, Director Swart. Any questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Would somebody like to move that motion, please? Recommendation. Councillor Grant, mover. Councillor Benton, seconder. Councillor Grant, would you like to speak for or against?
Well, I will speak for the recommendation, but then also to emphasise that I've had a number of concerns from ratepayers in that location who are very, very concerned that you know, any development that goes ahead in that area is done with the utmost of environmental concerns and paying attention to retaining as much vegetation in the area, and I think people are just so much more conscious of that in everything that they do, and certainly that was you know, something that was raised with me. But knowing that the planning application has been put an emphasis on not removing vegetation unnecessarily, I'm quite prepared to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton? Any other councillor like to speak for or against? I now put that to the vote, please. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion is carried. If we could just please let in the mayor, please, back in the meeting. Welcome back, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bustle. 15.3 is Tourism Events and Grants Program. Director Swart.
Thank you again. Council's Tourism Event Grant Program provides financial assistance to event organisers for the promotion and development of tourism events. The program is divided into 2 rounds each financial year. Council is requested to consider awarding funding to successful applicants for events taking place between January and June 2022. 15 applications were received as part of this round of funding, and they were assessed against the program criteria. It's recommended that Council awards the available $20,000 to 6 events listed in the recommendation.
Thank you, Director Schwartz. Are there any questions from the gallery? No. Can I have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Bustle and Councillor Fuller. Councillor Bustle, would you like to talk?
You know, this is not a huge amount of money, $20,000, but it's a huge support for these events in the rural city of Wangaratta. And I just want to point out that many Wangaratta residents are not necessarily tourists, but they attend these events very, very strongly. And I appreciate that. So I thank the council and the CEO for supporting this program. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been a part of a small event for the last better part of 10 years, I can appreciate how these kind of grants really boost the committee's well-being and ability to pull off these kind of tourism and event style economic development things, and so I appreciate the work they're putting in to actually run their events. Thank you.
Any other councillor like to talk? Councillor Green? No, get the microphone on. Councillor Bustle, did you need to finish off?
No, I'll just say the same thing again. It's a great program. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Swart, 15.4 is a planning application, permit PIN application 21/160, development of 2 dwellings and a 2-lot subdivision is 1 at 2 Bowerberg Way, Wangaratta.
Thank you. The application seeks planning approval for the development of 2 dwellings on a corner lot at number 2 Bowerberg Way, Wangaratta, and also subsequent subdivision of the land into 2 lots. Notice of the application was given and 4 objections were received. These objections have been considered and the proposal has been assessed against the relevant provisions of the Planning Environment Act and the Wangaratta Planning Scheme, and the recommendation is to support subject to the inclusion of permit conditions.
Are there any questions from the gallery on this planning application? No, can I have a mover please of the recommendation? Councillor Benton, and a seconder please. Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton, did you need to talk on the recommendation?
Like I say, I think some of the grievances have been addressed in the conditions that have been implied on these conditions going forward, so and it's been assessed against our planning scheme, so it's a pretty straightforward step for this to go through.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Herry, please.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, just to reiterate Councillor Benton's comments, I think the conditions will address some of the concerns. Just with respect to amenity and character, it is a new developmental area, and I guess there are a lot of different factors that influence what determines the amenity and character. So I can appreciate that, you know, different densities and this smaller block with increased density and 2 stories can cause a little bit of angst for some people, but there are precedents of it in the area, and like I said, it's a new area that has developing character, and we definitely need more increased density housing and diversity in our housing.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. No other councillor. Councillor Benton, nothing to finish off. Put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The motion now is carried. Thank you, councillors. 15.5 is the sale of industrial land at property number 18397 Detour Road, North Wenger. Director Swart, please.
This report is presented to Council to commence Council's statutory process to sell vacant land in Detour Road, North Wenger. The land has been identified for future industrial development, and an expression of interest process for the sale of the land was completed in August and September 2020. Through that process, a memorandum of understanding was agreed with an interested party, and an offer has now been formally received to purchase the land to further develop the site for expansion of a business in Wangaratta. It's recommended that Council gives public notice of its intention to sell the land as required by the Local Government Act.
Are there any questions from the gallery on this land? No. Can I have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Benton. A seconder, please. Councillor Fitzpatrick. Sorry, Councillor Herry, didn't see your thing. Councillor Benton, did you need to talk on this?
I think again this is a pretty straightforward recommendation, Mr Mayor. It's going to be, obviously we've been able to lead to believe going to be an increase in jobs go forward, so it's a pretty positive move all round.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Herry, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Rees. I'll just say that the proposal is definitely one that would provide a lot of opportunity for Wangaratta and encourage everyone to put their opinions in and make a submission, and they'll be considered and noted when it comes back. Thank you.
Thank you. No other councillors? Just before I go back to Councillor Benton, this is all around jobs and growth in our area, and organisations looking to do that without saying who they are certainly a good fit for Wangaratta, and look forward to the land being developed further and offering lots of jobs and positions. Councillor Benton?
I just think we might clarify something. I don't think there's any submissions coming forward for this. It's the LOIs have already been in.
Correct.
And she's further down the track. Thank you.
Yeah, so the public notice that we're giving is people can make a submission on it of our intent to sell the land to an organisation. Yes. So with further ado, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Stephen Swart. 15.6, sale of land at 75 Carbor, Werrowley Road, Werrowley South.
Thank you. The parcel of land was formerly known as the Werrowley South Community Centre and Scout Hall, and has been vacant and underutilised for a number of years. An expression of interest to purchase the land has been received, and the next step is for us to undertake a consultation process In accordance with the Local Government Act, the recommendation is to give public notice of council's intention to sell that land.
Thank you. Any questions from the gallery? Please, John, step forward.
I'll just suggest.
Yes.
Yeah, I was involved a few years ago in the program where the council was prepared to sell this land. As Stephen said, there was a scaffold and a school there, and I was involved with the committee that wanted to keep the land for use by the residents. You just can't predict what activities might come up in the future and the reason for that land. If there was a growth of houses in that area, then you've lost use of this land if you sold it off. It's a bit like in the past where governments have sold off school land and then found that they need the land later on. So I'm just expressing my concern for sudden selling of the land, and I know at the time some of the council officers were very keen to get rid of it, so to speak, and at the time the local residents were keen to keep it. So I'm not sure whether in fact nothing's happening there. I haven't kept up to date, but I'll certainly find out from the residents who live out that area in South Warrawee. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Swart, would you suggest that John put in a submission or recommendation there?
If councillors adopt a recommendation tonight, we will give notice and there will be an opportunity to make a submission. You're quite right, there was a process that played out in 2014 around potentially selling the land, and based on some community submissions, the sale did not go ahead, with the intention that the incorporated body would take control of that land and look after it. That unfortunately hasn't happened to my knowledge. So hence we've received another expression of interest more recently from somebody that's interested in purchasing the land, and we're just going through the statutory process of providing notice of the intention to sell.
Thank you. Irene?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in response to John's comments, I know we were administrators at the time when that issue came up for consideration, and I know that there was willingness at the time for the community to put in submissions and actually get organised and do something, but I understand that nothing was done, and this is why we're considering the matter again. So since 2014 to now, while there was initial people felt that they'd like to do something, nothing was done. So I guess this is there's probably an opportunity maybe to put something forward, but I think it is that while there was enthusiasm, the enthusiasm hasn't been transferred into action.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. If there's no other questions, I'll look for a mover of the recommendation. Councillor Bussell to move it. Councillor Grant will second it. Councillor Bussell, did you want to talk on this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The Warrawee Rec Reserve is such a magnificent place, and I would prefer to see funds transferred into other facilities we have to make them better. This money, if and when it gets sold, will go into the council's coffers, but it does help bolster opportunities for Warrawee in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors talk on the recommendation on Councillor Herry?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just follow on the tail of Councillor Grant's comments and the history of this. It definitely has been up before and put out, and there was the community. There was some passion and input from the community came out indicating they'd like to form a committee and put the land to some other purpose. I definitely do encourage submissions on it. It's a piece of land that isn't huge, and I'd be interested to hear what the community has to say around that, and I guess perspective on being on the other side of that whole process and actually implementing some of those ideas, whatever they might have been back in the time. Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. If there's no other talk, Councillor Russell, did you need to say something to end off?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Okay, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Swart, 15.7 is our climate mitigation and adaptation policy.
Thank you. The council plan includes an action to develop and adopt a council change policy. This item is about seeking community feedback on a draft policy that's been developed, and it's now called the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Strategy. It is recommended that council endorses the draft Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Policy for a 60-day public exhibition process.
Thank you. There is a question, not from the gallery but online, from Cassandra Pollock. Could consideration be given to extending the public submission time to 90 days? We've got it at 60 days for the climate mitigation and adaptation policy. So yes, we could consider it. We do have 60 days on there, which is outside our normal scope. We normally only do around 28 days. So I feel that 60 days, I look to my councillors for their opinion. Are we happy to keep it at the 60 days current form, councillors, or did you want to expand it? Anyone would want to expand it to 90? Councillor Herry, did you have something?
Yeah, just a comment around the period. Our normal 28 days, I would argue, is often inadequate. We are providing 60 days.
Actually, that is a part of the recommendation. If there's an alternative motion to come up, it should be considered in that motion.
That's true. Councillor Herry, just one moment, I'll get you to talk on that at the once we put the recommendation. Did you have an alternate recommendation that you wanted to raise? No.
No.
No. Okay, so firstly I'll put the recommendation as it stands for 60 days to that. Can I have a mover? As per the recommendation here.
I'm going to move, Mr Chairman, that the recommendation as per res point 3 that's on the screen at the moment be adopted.
Just speak up, Councillor Benton, we'd like to hear what you're saying.
I am moving, Mr Fox, recommendation accept point 3. The leading point 3 of the recommendation is in the agenda.
Sure. Can I have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Fuller. Councillor Benton, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Well, mainly my part sits in the ground about adopting the part point 3. I would like to see this come back to the council with laws in the future, because there is some, I believe, anomalies in the draft that we've got to address going forward. That's my only reasoning in making sure that it does come back to the council.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Benton? Councillor Bustle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a draft document that may affect many of my constituents in the South Ward, and there's some words in the draft document that I don't think fit the reasonable, fair-minded persons test, and so we'll look at that when it comes back again. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillors like to talk on it? Councillor Fuller?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In talking about the name change that Director Swart mentioned, I think it's important that we start to look forward about ways to work together within our resources and meaningful ways in which we can actually take on this challenge.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Herry?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, maybe just to pick up on the thread of the name change, I'm definitely keen to hear on community's input with respect to that. Typically, I guess this kind of document would be called a climate change policy, not necessarily the name that it has. It's really semantic, I guess, and it doesn't change the actual content of the document, but sometimes I feel it helps to talk straight and not be euphemistic about things. So I'd like to get community's input on that. Just to follow up and go back about the consultation period, I definitely think the 28 days can sometimes be inadequate. In this case, we are providing a longer period, which I hope the community finds adequate in order to, meet, because committees and various groups have their own schedules, and it can sometimes be difficult for them to squeeze in getting together and reviewing their input onto a document and then having it submitted in time. However, I do feel that the bulk of January will be available for community in this instance, and the document isn't a huge document. It's not a really big one. So yeah, thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And well, I'm a gal who loves a deadline, and I think 60 days for a 3-page document isn't an unreasonable amount of time. And if people are really passionate about putting in a submission, they will find the time to do that. They also need to understand that if they're having trouble getting their submission together, that council is also willing to listen, to extend time. So I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing what the community has to say about this particular policy, and council will be able to consider and review into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. So I urge everybody to, if you have some changes, to certainly get your submissions in on the climate mitigation and adaptation policy for it to come back to a future council meeting. So I'll put, sorry, Councillor Benton, to end off.
I just want to end off by explaining to the gallery and the public, Mr. Mayor, that this is actually in the Act. We must have a climate plan, so it's really housekeeping to a point. But if we're going to have a housekeeping job done, I think it's got to be done properly.
Thank you. So I'll put the recommendation to the vote, which is, as you see on the screen, less clause number 3, as Councillor Benton raised as the recommendation. Are all those in favour? The motion is carried. We'll move on to, thanks Director Swart, to 15.8, which is our Domestic Animal Management Plan 21 to 25.
Thank you. Council has a responsibility under the Domestic Animals Act 1994 to prepare a Domestic Animal Management Plan. Following from the council meeting on the 26th of October this year, where council endorsed the draft plan for public consultation. The consultation has been completed. Council invited community feedback and received 13 submissions in response. No changes are required as a result of the submissions, and it's recommended that council adopts the Domestic Animal Management Plan.
Thank you, Director Swart. Are there any questions from the gallery? No, can I have a move of that, please? Councillor Fuller and Councillor Fitzpatrick to second. Councillor Fuller, any comments, please? No, no comments. Councillor Fitzpatrick. Any other councillors to comment? So an easy one. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in, sorry, Councillor Herry, did you have a comment?
Sorry, it's slow to get in there. Yeah, I just wanted to say that some of the submissions, or a fair portion of them, regarded a cat curfew. That is just going to be addressed as a separate item, so it will be reviewed whether or not to have one, and go out to community for another set of consultation, rather than kind of slip it in with this one. So just wanted to put that out there and let those submitters know.
Thank you, Councillor Herry.
Thank you.
Nothing further, Councillor Fuller as the mover. So I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance here today. We'll continue on to that there is no special committees reports, minutes of advisory committees or urgent business. So we'll move into public question time, and I have some public questions in writing, and then I'll go to the gallery if anyone has a couple of public questions. The first question is from a submitter, Barbara Griffiths of Werrali. Councillors, having read the relevant policy statements re the value of local trees, how is it that some councillors voted against this policy in approving the removal of remnant grey box in Sisley Avenue. Please reconsider your decision. Well, firstly, I'd like to add that we can't reconsider the decision. The decision has been made at a previous council meeting, and that there's many reasons, as we said in our approach to this matter last month, that my decision for approving this application to go ahead and against the planning recommendation was this is an industrial area. We need industrialised businesses here. We don't try and put a factory in the middle of a forest or a native area. We need business in town. We need a conciliatory approach where both parties can be met comfortably. That was my recommendation in moving forward for this planning application to remove the grey box trees. There is always appeals processes that are always open to people who have lodged objections, and that's the next matter with VCAT if it decides to go that far. So if any other councillor would like to comment on that public question, I'm more than happy to hear their comments. Councillor Grant.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just, I know that I've had some comment back to me with regard to the decision, and I've suggested to people, objectors, that if they wish to take their objection to the VCAT, they can do that. The process is open for that.
Thank you, Councillor Grant, for those comments. Any other councillor like to comment? No, thank you. I'll now move to some other questions. So we've got another question from Vicky Lorraine Beaches, and this is, I might throw this over to Director Goonan. So the question is, has council estimated the number of homes which will be inundated with water during heavy rains once the development of the 15 Mile Creek Bridge is completed? And is there any real value, question 2, to Wenger residents of the redevelopment due to the large cost involved when truck access is already provided via Greta Road? Director Goonan.
Thank you, Mayor Rees, and thank you, Vicky, for your question. I will assume that the question is in relation to possible alternate freight routes for Wenger as set out within the 2016 freight study by council. There is no set route for this yet. It is something that council officers are working on at the moment. So there is, at this point in time, no homes that would be impacted by any works. The value of the alternate freight routes is quite significant. It does a number of different things, including freeing up our CBD and allowing us to make that more pedestrian and bike friendly. It takes heavy vehicles out of the CBD. It increases safety along Phillipson Street, which is currently being used as a heavy vehicle route. And it just generally improves the amenity, as well as allowing heavy vehicles and industrial areas to be able to be accessed more directly.
Thank you, Director. I'll read another question out from a Patrick Ciccone, Senior Engineer from Project Wide Spark Northeast Link. There's 3 questions here that I will just quickly go over and answer quickly as I go through each one. If the Mayor would be happy to raise my questions, would be very much appreciated, and thank you so much for your assistance. The intended questions are below. 1, when will Council make a decision in respect to planning applications? Planning application decisions are made daily. Some get a little bit hairy where there's objectors, and of course a planning decision then has to come back to a council meeting, and that gets done at the end, or normally towards the end of every month. The council gather and make those decisions on planning applications that cannot be done through under advisement through our planning department. Question 2 was, will council consider any amendments to planning applications? Yes, we always consider amendments to planning applications done through the same form. A planning amendment application can be lodged for any planning application that is in or that has even been granted. That planning application amendment can certainly be put in, and planners will look at that and go through the full process as they would a planning application. And number 3, in the event that a planning application is not accepted, will council provide details and reasons for their decisions? Yes, they will provide detail, whether it's accepted at a council meeting or declined at a council meeting because of objections and other processes that we go through. That will be relevant to that planning application, will be on display at our council meeting for councillors to talk on, and the reasons why in that recommendation, or the recommendation to refuse will be reasons within that recommendation. And that will be provided back to the applicant in writing. Thank you for those questions. So I'll now hand over to the gallery. Are there any questions from the gallery? Sorry? Yes, please, John.
Yeah, my question is just to follow on, not that we were team tagging on this, wife and myself. It's John Griffiths from Morale. To follow on about the cutting down of the trees in the Sicily Avenue area, and that follows on from tree cutting down in Christensen's Lane. There seems to be really not much thought given to retaining, perhaps not all the trees in those areas, but at least some of the trees to mitigate the real heat problems we have in the city. I've just happened to pick out an article out of the National Geographic, it was in the library today, and it's clear that cities all over the world are trying to tackle the same thing with climate change, that cities are getting hotter, and I just wonder how much thought was given by the council. In fact, apparently some of the councils didn't even vote one way or the other. Is that correct? But my real question is how much concern has been given to this heat issue in our city?
Thank you, John. Just in relation to councillors voting, I conducted the meeting and all councillors voted, some for and some against the recommendation. And we always take numerous situations with trees into consideration. And yes, we are strong believers in trees, absolutely. We do a lot of replanting throughout the years, and that will continue. We plant hundreds of trees every year to help mitigate the loss of some trees for development of businesses. We can't have it all sometimes, but we certainly do a lot of tree plantings, and it was a tough decision to recommend to knock those trees out and get that decision happening, but it was a 5-2 vote, so council spoke that way. So thanks for your question though, appreciate it. Councillor Fallon.
And just to follow on, Mr Mayor, the conversation around this topic was around planting the right trees. Councillor Bussell will back me on this in terms of getting the right trees to look at that things such as like the heat mapping and things like that. So that will continue into the future off the back of these kind of decisions.
Thank you, Councillor. And John, also part of the development plan for this, if this goes ahead and those trees do come out, is a full new landscape plan which will have to include certain things, example like tree planting and shrub planting, to help limit those things. There is usually, correct Stephen, that there would be a landscape plan supplied with the redevelopment of this property.
I'm not 100% sure about that specific one, but that is something we apply to most of those types of developments, to require some landscape planning for a number of reasons. One is, from a visual point of view, sometimes landscaping helps a little bit, but also from an environmental point of view, it helps. It does take a period of time for landscaping to mature and has its full effect.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Yes, John again, second question.
Yeah, the second question is also looking back, but I don't always do that. That's to do with the bike lane project along Phillips Street. I think it's a great plan, a great development there. Some people seem to be concerned they can't drive down there. I just question whether they're very good drivers if they can't negotiate and go down through a few chicanes, whatever you might put, the bollards. Just the same as in Melbourne has bollards all over the place now for different reasons, and you've got to negotiate. But my question is, with the actual fine details of the bike lanes, you've actually got quite a wide, and I think it's terrific, the way they've got painted areas, which is supposed to keep cars out from where the bikes are. And I think a lot of people really lost the idea, or perhaps they never did, that this is for the safety of children who would like to ride their bikes, but they've been put off by, I'm not sure, the fact that there's so much more traffic in the city. So I just think it's a wonderful plan, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. There's not going to be 50 bike riders going down Phillips Street tomorrow, or perhaps early next year, but it'll take time for parents to get the confidence to be able to have their children ride their bikes down Phillips Street, connecting 4 big schools, all in that same street. So there's potential for a lot of bike riders. Sorry, to get to my question, and I followed this very closely in Melbourne, and where they've put in the bike lane structure, they've always had rumble strips running down so that, if you like, lazy car drivers can just drift into the painted white area, which they can now. But if you've got a rumble strip, the driver will suddenly realise, oh, I've got to keep away. So I just think that effort should be made to have a rumble strip, perhaps to investigate that as part of the whole project. I don't think because you've supposedly completed the project, you think, well, it's all done and dusted. I think they need to revise.
Have some more. Yep. Thank you, John. Director Goonan, any thoughts?
Thanks for your support of the project, John, and Council would love to take all the credit, but the reality is that this is a Regional Roads Victoria project on a council road and supported by council officers.